Good Sunday morning. This is Pastor Jack Hiles at Finding Grace Church in Berkeley Springs. We're located out on 522 at Business Park Circle there by Dawson's and by Roscoe's. And we invite you whenever we're able to start gathering again to come and be with us some Sunday. We want to share with you a few minutes this morning, some things we've been thinking about this week. I don't want to keep you too long. I know it's hard to just sit in front of the computer and listen to a long sermon. So just a few thoughts that I had this morning. I was thinking about the spotless lamb and out of 1 Peter 1, verse number 19, where it says, "But with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish." And, I started thinking about Old Testament law and the order of things back then. And, in order to bring a sacrifice to the Lord for forgiveness of sins, it had to be a lamb that what they would call a lamb that was spotless. That meant he couldn't be crippled, or he couldn't be imperfect in any way. He couldn't be weak. He couldn't be crippled. He had to be a perfect lamb. And, the thing that I think is so unique is I have friends and stuff that I talk to sometimes and share the Lord with, and they'll tell me, one of these days I want to start coming to church. As soon as I quit doing this and as soon as I quit doing that, I'm going to start coming. And I don't know why we think we have to quit doing things in order to come to the house of God, because we come to the house of God and He gives us help in whatever we need and whatever struggle we're going through. He just accepts us and wants us to come just as we are. And He'll do the work that needs to be done through the love and through the blood of His Son, Jesus Christ. But, I was thinking about that, and we so much tend to pick apart ourselves. We're all the time talking about, we're not worthy to come to Him and all those things that and we start looking at and thinking about our past that has held us hostage, and not realizing that, according to the custom of law, when they would bring the lamb into the holy place for sacrifice, into the outer courts of the temple of God, they would not look at the person who brought the lamb, but they would look at the lamb. It wasn't anything about the person and what he had done. What the high priest looked at, what he inspected, was a spotless lamb. And what we don't realize is that we're not, when we come to Jesus Christ, God doesn't see us in what we were. He sees us through the blood of His Son, Jesus Christ, which was our sacrifice of a spotless lamb. In the Old Testament, the first time that they used a blood sacrifice was when the children were in bondage in Egypt, and the death angel was going to come through the land of Egypt and kill all of the firstborn. And God gave orders and commandments to the Israelites that they were to take a lamb into their house. They were to apply the blood on the doorpost of their homes, and they were to take the lamb within the house, and they were to consume the lamb. They were to eat the lamb, and they were to eat it with the pertinence thereof. And I like how it goes on to tell them the way that they needed to be done. It needed to be done roasted by fire. It couldn't be in water. It couldn't be boiled. None of those things. It had to be roasted by fire. And I thought about that for a while. I thought, God, why did you say you didn't want it made any other way? And I believe that what God's trying to tell us in that moment is you can't add to or take away from a lamb. You can't water it down. You can't boil it. And sometimes we're guilty. Sometimes I know we get accused a lot of times. People are accusing some of us ministers who believe in the grace message and believe in the love of God that changes our hearts, that sometimes we're too loose with our message. But then also you got to remember, it's not just talking about those that were too loose, but those who were too strict. Those who didn't realize how much love God did have for us, and how much forgiveness and how much at Calvary, the cost that He gave us. We're not righteous by what we've done ourselves. We're not righteous by what we do. We are righteous by His blood. If we could do it ourselves, then there would have been no need for the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. We could have just lived by the law, and that would have been, but even the lawgiver, Moses himself, couldn't make it by the law. So there was a better sacrifice. Not a lamb that was sacrificed year after year, every year for the next year, but a lamb that was one time, once and for all of us, over 2,000 years ago, sacrificed Himself, the perfect lamb was sacrificed for us at Calvary's tree. And you know, they were to take that lamb in Egypt and they were to apply that blood, and then they were to take the lamb into their house. And what that signal was is not that the death angel that there wasn't a death in the house. It signaled that there was already a death there. The blood that was applied to the doorpost said to the death angel when he came through, there's already been a death appropriated here. Can I tell you something today? When you accept Jesus Christ into your heart, there's already been a death here. You're a new creation. You're a brand new man. All things start, everything from there on is you begin to move and have your being in a new creation. And the more that we learn about Christ and the more that we find out about his love, you know, Jesus summed up the commandments in the New Testament. He said, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. Love your neighbor as yourself. If you do these things, you fulfill the law. And you know, when you begin to think about that, the Old Testament was rules and regulations, but the New Testament was love and sacrifice, and it was done, a whole different covenant was made. And you know what the beauty of it was to me is not only did he sacrifice himself, but he got up after 3 days to be the administrator of his own will. You know, in other words, he was going to make sure that we got exactly what he had written in his New Testament, his last will and testament. You know, I appreciate God and what he's been doing. And you know, they were told to take that lamb into their house and they were to consume the whole lamb, the pertinence thereof. You know, sometimes there are some of the scripture and some of the word that we read that we have a hard time with. But God says, you know, not only do you get the good parts, the things that you like to hear, the things that please your palate, but you also sometimes got to consume some things that's a little rough at first when you begin to chew on it. But you know, I thank God that once we begin to realize, you know, and make those changes in our lives, we begin to see how much better our lives are and how much more effective we can become. You know, I was thinking about some of those things, and a few years ago we had a young man come to our youth camp here at my sister's church, Word of Deliverance, and he came out of the inner cities of Baltimore, and he would not fellowship with any of the other kids and other young men and women, and he was very rebellious. And one of the counselors had walked up to him before a service one Sunday night and told him, you know, laid his hand on his shoulder and told him, you know, it was time for him to come into church. And he turned around and looked at that counselor and he said, if you ever lay your hands on me again, he said, I'll kill you. And it scared the counselor a little bit. It shook him up. Well, the Lord began to move that night into service, and God had spoken to me a word to share, and I began to share and interact with him. You know, instead of coming at him the way he was used to, and that's with, you know, rules and regulations, and instead of coming with, you know, punishment, I began to teach and preach on the love of Jesus Christ, and I began to ask him in the congregation who was on the Lord's side, and I began to see him respond to the message that night, and when it was time for the altar call, I remember him coming up and giving his heart to the Lord and asking God into his life, and a lot of the other young men got around him and laid their hands on him and prayed with him. And I remember going back down to the dorm where the boys were staying at, and I noticed that he was standing with all the other guys, and they were talking, and they were carrying on, and they were, you know, just having a good time. I seen a completely different young man walk from that altar back down to that dorm that night. And, you know, as the rest of the week pursued and he got into the services, he entered in and he really got something and got a hold of God. And, you know, at the end of the camp, sometimes we'll ask some of the young men and women if they'd like to come up and share a few words before they leave. And this young man walked up to the front and he looked at everybody sitting there and he said, you know, where I come from, he said, I was known to be good with a gun. He said, I carried a 45 in my hip all the time. But he says, when I go back, he lifts a Bible up in his hand. He said, I'm going to be good with this. Can I tell you the best way to reach people today is through the love of Jesus Christ? Not through laws, not through regulations, not through rules, but sharing the grace and love, the forgiveness of a Father that loves you, the one that even as the prodigal son took and spent all that he had, his father was standing outside waiting on him to return, waiting on him to receive him. And when he comes, he puts a ring on his finger and a robe on his back and welcomes him back into the house in the kingdom of his Father. And I think the more we learn about the love of Jesus Christ, the more we're going to not be so judgmental of those who have not yet come to the place we've come to yet. You know, I learned a long time ago that I would do a whole lot more for someone out of love than I would out of a command. You know, my mother, when we were younger, there was 7 siblings, and she would ask us to come to do the dishes, and my brother and I would fight over who was going to wash the dishes and who was going to rinse the dishes, and you know, we would struggle with that all the time. But my mama would walk up to me every now and then. She'd lay her hand on my shoulder and she'd say, "Jack, you're the best dishwasher I ever had. You can do it a whole lot better than the other brothers can. I really would appreciate if you go on and do those dishes and wash them dishes for me." You know, I had it a whole lot harder, found it a whole lot harder to say no when someone's telling you and loving you and lifting you up and appreciating who you are. And, you know, I would do it anytime. Now I do the dishes all the time for my wife. I do them because I love her. I do them because she works. And I do them because I don't want her to have all that to do. And I don't mind doing it any longer. Because out of love, we don't mind responding and doing for others. And not only that, but a greater testimony of the Lord is when we can show the love of Jesus Christ to those around us. You know, I'm thankful for what God did, sending his son, and I'm thankful for what Christ did at Calvary, the sacrifices that he's made, that we might have a relationship with him, that we might know him, that we might be able to make decisions for ourselves as to what's right for us and what's wrong for us. You know, I find it a whole lot easier that we can love somebody into the kingdom better than we can scare them into the kingdom. And, you know, that's the message that we are ministering. That's the message that we're preaching. Jesus was the spotless lamb. That's what the high priest inspected. That's what God received as an offering. And when we come to Christ through his blood, all the Father sees is his son when he looks at us. And he's waiting on us just like he did the prodigal, with a robe for our back and a ring for our finger, ready to welcome us in to his kingdom. We thank you for coming, for being with us this morning. We thank you that we've been able to share a few things with you today that maybe will bless your heart. Until we see you again next week, or when we're able to have services again, we just pray God's blessings upon each and every one of you.